Norm Esmond started his sermon with how scary it is for preachers to stand in front of you and interpret God's message for us. Multiply that a few times when you are a chemist who has more familiarity with data and charts and chemical structures than the Scripture. You'll see some of that influence in the sermon this morning in setting the context for how I see the United Church today. That's in terms of data. But it is a privilege to be here with you this morning. I just wanted to say if anyone has hearing loss or has any difficulty understanding the sermon, there are extra copies out there. You can actually read along if that would be suitable for you. And my spouse Linda would be happy to get you a copy if that's the case. Just put your hand up and she'll bring it to you. We read all Scripture through the lens of our own experience. In reading from Mark today, my interest was drawn to two things. The first is the sense of urgency in Jesus getting into his role as a preacher-teacher. Mark starts, the Gospel of Mark starts right away. It starts with the baptism of Jesus, then a time in the wilderness to contemplate on his new role, and then he recruited disciples. And as a verse in the Scripture, this is a verse just part of what Al read this morning. It says, Jesus lost no time in getting to the meeting place in Capernaum, and he started to teach. Following that, Jesus went to Simon and Andrew's house, and reading this morning, healed Simon's mother-in-law and many more that showed up that evening. And then he prayed in a secluded place. And then the next day, he went out to meeting places in Galilee again. So one observation I have of that is that as followers of Jesus, the model we are given is one of reflection, action, reflection, action, in a non-foreign way. I'll come back to this theme later. Secondly, I was interested in where Jesus went to teach. In the Message, the Bible in contemporary language that Al read from this morning, the word meeting place is used instead of synagogue. You might have remembered that place. Jesus said Jesus went to the synagogue. This morning, the Bible reading said went to a meeting place. A synagogue is a Greek word that literally means a gathering of people, but also refers to as a place of assembly. It was a place that served as a school, as a place of communal meals, political meetings, and also worship space. It reminds me of the wide range of roles played today in rural communities. I'm particularly interested in rural communities because I have rural roots. And in those places, the churches are often, at this stage in our society, the only place in the area where the community can gather. And it's increasingly becoming, a community space is becoming part of life for urban churches as well. If you think about it, it's remarkable that parishes and churches have survived for so long. I was listening to someone one day who said the only structures that are around from the early days, this was the 1500s, are universities and churches. Almost every other public structure has changed. The Christian religion was taken over by the Roman Empire, as you know, under Constantine as a state religion. And just as an aside, I don't think we really have any imagination of what a state religion feels like. So I would ask you to imagine what it would be like if Kingston City Council, on their agenda, was talking about how we should practice communion. That's what a state religion is about. The political structures determine what happens in the state community. So the congregational parish style survived that time that they made a state religion, and when the Roman Empire declined, parishes sprang up or were reactivated, and that basic pattern has continued to today. Parish structure survived the split of the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox churches. and the Reformation, and here we are today. The expression of the Christian church has changed, but the fundamental structure has lasted for centuries. However, that model has been under stress since the 1960s. Writers on religious trends, Phyllis Tickle and Vanna Butler-Bass, have noted that the different eras just mentioned, the shift from state to parish structure, the split between Catholic and Orthodox, the Reformation and today, occur in 500-year time spans. Maybe just an observation, but that's their observation. And so the first structure was parishes being set up in 500 in the common era, a split in 1,000 in the common era, the Reformation in 1500, and the current shift in the 2000s, because they believe a shift is going on in the parish structure now. Tickle has written about these events in terms of house cleaning, a time when some things are let go of and new patterns are established. She and Butler-Bass think that we have been in another transition in the church over the last 50 years, a transition that is still continuing. So what does the current transition look like? This is where the data comes in. Couldn't help myself. When we think of church, we tend to think of our own congregation, which is appropriate and natural. We tend to expect that our experience is the norm, but there is a wider context in which our congregations exist. The Pew Research Center in the USA is an organization that has collected data on churches for many years and thankfully makes its reports public. In the USA, they have documented the decline in Christian church membership and attendance over many years. The current pattern in the United States is a slow decline in membership and attendance, with a sharp rise in people not affiliated with any faith group. The faith community is aging, and the percentage of non-affiliated millennials, that's people 25 to 40, the percentage of non-affiliated people is at 36%, compared to the general public average of 20% across the United States. Similar trends exist in Canada. Stats Can tells us that evangelicals and non-affiliated are the fastest growing groups in Canada. For example, those who identify as not affiliated were only 12% of our population in the 1991 census. They moved to 16.5% in 2001 census and 24% in the current census. And that represents some 7.8 million people in Canada with no church affiliation. By the way, Christianity is still the largest church affiliation. It's about 25% are these days are non-affiliated, 10% or 11% are the rest of the religions altogether. Many people think the rest of the religions are much higher than they are, but there's only 11% and the rest of us are Christian. Evangelical Christians are also growing, and they currently represent about 5% of the total Christian membership. So the decline has been happening primarily in mainline churches. The United Church peaked in its membership around 1967, surprisingly enough. You look at the charts, and has been in decline ever since. If you plot membership over time, which I like to do, you see a lot of growth in the 50s and 60s, and then it's been tailing off ever since. It's now starting to get some attention in the church. The 50s and 60s were where a lot of new churches were built. We can point to many of them in Kingston. The addition was made to Sidney Street, which is our back addition. And as I said, there's a decline. So I collected data on the number of givers. This is giving families in giving family units in the United Church in Kingston congregations from 2003 to 2014. That's an 11-year span. Is it out of interest? You may know that the United Church publishes a yearbook every year where we send in data about how many givers we have. And that's a mark of participation. So there were about over 2,000 giving families, 2,089 in fact, in 2003, and 1,367 in 2014, so I'll do the math for you. That's 700 fewer givers in 2014 than there were in 2003. And that's equivalent to the loss of 2 congregations, the size of both of our congregations put together. We're about 300 giving families between Chalmers and Sidney Street as both churches. And those 700 givers losses were absorbed by other churches in Kingston, and mainly by the larger congregations. You find that places like Cataraqui, Zion, small places the numbers have been almost stable as the larger congregations that have absorbed that loss. So, why am I giving you this depressing news? Well, in part I raised the story of the Christian church to help us see that we are in a change in Western Europe and in North America. I'm not talking about the rest of the world in terms of Christian churches in that area. And I also want us to see that as individuals, it's not any one individual's fault. And as congregations, it's not our fault. And the other one is, it's not the minister's fault. And it's not God's fault. It just is. The evidence is that there's a transition going on in relation to how we live out our traditional Christian practices and traditions. So as Christians in 2018, what do we do about it? Well, I would go back to my reflection on the actions of Jesus as outlined in Mark. Jesus meditated, prayed, and then took action. Then meditated again, and acted again. There's a lot of praying, meditating, and discerning going on in the United Church of Canada, and in the United Churches in the United Church of Canada. And I find that encouraging. Over the past 6 years, the United Church has supported the EDGE network, and that's a network that has worked with both our congregations in envisioning and considering ideas outside the box. Many congregations and courts of the church have been in this discerning mode, and there are emerging signs of action. Some congregations have looked outside their walls and partnered with groups in the community, particularly in the areas of social justice. I would point out that next Sunday's Love Songs and Delectables is a partnership with Love and Spoonful. That's the kind of outreach to the community I'm talking about in terms of partnerships. For financial stability, many have converted part of their property to housing developments. Some were commercial, and some subsidized. I was in a large United Church in Vancouver this summer, one that Gary Patterson, the former moderator, is minister in. And right at the back of the church building is a 40-story tower. Maybe it's 20. It just looked big. And they generate $500,000 a year in income from that unit. And that unit they built was not subsidized, but in fact it was commercial rate rentals, because that was the need right where they were. So that's a route that some churches are taking, which is giving them financial stability as their numbers change. Ones that have interested me in particular include Trinity St. Paul's in Toronto, who have filled their excess capacity with arts and justice organizations. A model much like the first century when synagogues and churches performed the function of community centers and worship centers as well. Some rural churches along the St. Lawrence River have established cooperatives where 4 to 6 churches come together. They hire one minister, and they have 5 trained lay worship leaders. So on any one Sunday, there are 5 lay worship leaders doing worship in those rural congregations, and the minister as well, so they serve all 6. Usually they're geographically quite far apart, and so that's a mechanism that's been used by at least 2 cooperatives in that area of the country. The most striking example, I think, is an example that's just started, is where Carleton University, its board, has agreed to negotiate the purchase of Dominion Chalmers United Church in Ottawa for arts groups, performance venue, and a community hub, with the expectation that the congregation will continue to worship there after it's transformed into its function at the university. So there are many things going on. of changes in church administrative systems, there's not, in my view, yet enough attention on how churches need to change to serve the spiritual needs of the unaffiliated. Those who are spiritual but not religious. They even have an acronym, SBNR, spiritual but not religious. Those who declare no affiliation with any church, but are spiritual people. That's a topic for another day, which sometime we will get to. So here we are at Chalmers and Synastry are not alone in doing something different. We're not alone in the context of what is happening in other churches, and we're not alone in being led by the Spirit to do a new thing. What can we imagine God will lead us to do? Perhaps a strong base from which we can each develop strong and complementary missions. Look at the ministry of healing and teaching that resulted from a called activist Jewish rabbi in the first century. That impact is still being felt. It's amazing. So what's God calling us to do? I've chosen Deep in the Hearts as the hymn after the sermon, with the hope that the words and music will help us to discern how we can engage the Holy One's mission for us in our world today. I'll ask you to remain seated to sing this prayerful hymn, which is found on page 154 in Warren Oasis.